is this just a glitch due to the coronavirus shutdowns, or is there a bigger problem here with wind and solar?
Well, I mean, first of all, good morning, Matt. First of all, it's important to recognize that 2020 was set to be a record year for wind power. We were expecting something like 76 gigawatts, so the best year ever. Now, given what's happened with COVID and project delays, as you've mentioned, we expect that to be somewhere around maybe 15 to 20% perhaps less than what we'd expected, but it's still going to be a very big year for us. And I mean, just referring to those IEA figures, what the report shows that came out a couple of weeks ago is that actually renewables is the only energy sector that actually grows in 2020. As you know, oil, gas and coal all completely fall off a cliff. So we're still looking at growth in our sector, but obviously some impact from COVID. And I guess the key thing is how much of that delay, those delayed projects spills over to 2021. We still expect a lot of that, especially in China.
Yeah, Ben, good morning to you, and thank you for giving us the visual clues that tell us that you work for the global wind industry. Yeah, sign of the times, I suppose. Let me ask you about emerging markets then and the role of renewables there, because clearly we've seen renewables taking more of a market share versus older fossil fuels in emerging markets. But how quickly is EM catching up on that front?
Yeah, so I mean, as you know, I mean, it depends what you're talking about. Emerging markets. I mean, the mature markets are Europe, China, and the US. China is by far the biggest market, and then we've seen very strong growth over the years in places like India, Brazil, Mexico, and now increasingly Southeast Asia as well. So places like Vietnam. We'd expect that to continue. We wouldn't expect, this crisis resulting in people stopping their transition away from coal or oil or gas. I mean, there's no real reason why that should happen.
What do you think about countries where at least the locals feel there's a level of saturation? For example, Ben, here in Germany, it's an incredibly hot story on local media that communities are turning against windmill installations.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a really important issue. I mean, as you say, I mean, there's been a slowdown in some key markets because of these issues around permitting, and it's really, really important that governments get this right if we're going to go to a kind of accelerated phase of renewables development, which is what we need to reach the IPCC climate targets. And I mean, it's very important to recognize this is not a question of public acceptance. All around the world, all the polling indicates that people are more supportive of wind than they have been at any time in the past, and that includes places like Germany. What we have here is not really a problem with public acceptance. It's not a problem with community acceptance, because communities with wind farms tend to be even more supportive. I think what we have here is a problem of regulation. And there's clearly a need for reform, regulatory reform, to make the permitting process much more streamlined and easier. I mean, at the moment, you have certain countries where the legal framework allows one or two people to file legal challenges that can hold up projects for years. We clearly can't continue with those kind of systems.
No, Ben. It seems to be a problem of
Ben, do you see
anger from people in the community. They don't want windmills installed in, for example, nature parks, which is one place you often see them here, and they aren't appeased by small cash payments from companies. Do you think that maybe energy producers need to think about, giving communities a bigger share of the revenue?
Yeah, I mean, we absolutely think that companies should, first of all, have really good engagement with communities and find out, exactly what communities need and what is helpful for communities. And there's been lots of different forms which companies have tried to bring in revenue sharing and those kind of schemes, and we fully support that. And our engagement with communities is absolutely key. Having said that, I would insist, I mean, this is not a public acceptance problem per se. I mean, if you look at all the big polls that have been carried out, and they're carried out regularly by most of the major governments as well, public acceptance has actually gone up. So I wouldn't say this is a question of anger against wind farms, really, as a kind of trend.
Yeah. Ben, where do you see, when you look across Europe, just briefly, where do you see more opportunity to put green policy at the heart of the recovery that is going to need to take shape as a result of this crisis?
Well, I mean, it's a huge opportunity for economic stimulus. I mean, first of all, we know that there's a need for wind and solar to be ramped up to meet the climate targets. We know that we have a lot of shovel-ready projects that could be brought forward to speed things up. And we also know that the energy infrastructure of the world needs to be updated in terms of transmission infrastructure like ports and all these other things that are necessary to have a new kind of energy system. So, I mean, we estimate that if you get investment to kind of where it needs to be consistent with the IPCC, we need to reach something like 2 terawatts of wind power by 2030. And that implies something like 2 trillion of investment. So we're very engaged in talking to governments to say, look, this is an opportunity for countries and governments to come out of COVID through this kind of investment, which is really no harm, no regrets investment. And also, things like job creation as well. I mean, we calculate that jobs at the moment in wind energy are about 1.2 million at the end of 2018. And we think, again, if you get to something like 2 terawatts installations, we can take that to something like 4 million jobs by 2030.